Amidst the swamps, flooded jungles, and monsoon rains, the Owen gun stood alone, the only weapon capable of firing reliably when every other had jammed or rusted. Designed for the harshest environments, it wasn't the size or firepower that made it unique. It was the simple brilliance of its design, built to survive where others couldn't. The Owen gun tore through enemy lines with such force that entire crews never even saw what hit them. It was the weapon that could withstand mud, sand, water, and leaves when nothing else could. To understand how this small, humble gun changed the course of history, we must go back to its origins, to the moment when it proved that survival and victory were sometimes just a matter of design. The Pacific War wasn't just a battle of military might. It was a battle against the environment. The islands were unforgiving, with dense jungles, sticky mud, and constant rain that seemed to turn everything into a swamp. Soldiers fought not just against the enemy, but against the land itself. Everything, from weapons to equipment, had to withstand conditions that most of the world's military tools couldn't handle. Imagine this: soldiers trudging through thick mud, fighting through swamps, and then, when they needed their weapons the most, finding that everything had failed them. The Thompson submachine gun, once revered for its power, would clog with mud and stop firing. The British Stens, known for its simple design, was just as prone to jamming. Even the famous Japanese Arisaka rifle, with its reliable reputation, couldn't perform after being exposed to the relentless moisture and debris of the battlefield. The tropical heat and constant rain played havoc with metal, causing rust and corrosion that made these weapons useless. And then there was the Owen gun. At first, it looked unassuming, even strange. Compared to the more polished designs like the Thompson or the Stens, the Owen was nothing to write home about. It was compact, with a short barrel and a simple, almost crude appearance. But when the war hit the jungles of the Pacific, something remarkable happened. The Owen didn't jam. It didn't clog. It kept firing, time after time, even when submerged in water, caked with mud, or buried under a pile of leaves. Its creators at the Australian small arms factory didn't just want another submachine gun. They needed something that could survive the battlefield's harshest conditions, something that could keep going when every other weapon failed. The Owen had a unique enclosed design that kept debris from getting inside the mechanism. Unlike other guns that relied on open chambers where sand and dirt could easily slip in. And its heavy blowback action, which helped propel the bullet, made it powerful despite its small size. It was the simplicity. In the chaos of battle, soldiers didn't have time to worry about complicated cleaning kits or delicate machinery. They needed something that could be easily maintained in the field, and the Owen delivered. A quick wipe down with a cloth, and the weapon was good to go again, even after it had been dropped into a muddy trench or soaked in a torrential downpour. As Australian soldiers first began to carry the Owen into combat, there were doubts. Many of them were used to more established weapons, and the Owen didn't look like much in comparison. It didn't have the rugged reputation of the Thompson, nor the exotic appeal of the Arisaka. Yet, when they found themselves in the dense jungle of Papua New Guinea, or the mud of Guadalcanal, the Owen started to prove its worth. It could fire underwater, a feat that other weapons couldn't match. It didn't matter how deep the mud was, or how soaked the soldiers' gear became, the Owen kept going. In the thick jungle, where the soldiers had to push through waist-deep water or crawl through muck, the Owen was a weapon that wouldn't quit. In some of the most brutal and unforgiving conditions on Earth, it became the only weapon that didn't fail its user when it was needed most. And so, the Owen gun earned its place on the battlefield, while the soldiers around it cursed and struggled with weapons that constantly malfunctioned. It was simple. Yes, but that simplicity made it durable. And that durability saved lives. In a war where every advantage counted, the Owen gave Australian troops one thing they could count on: a weapon that wouldn't let them down. The first real test came in the thick jungles of Papua New Guinea, where the fighting was brutal and the environment even worse. The Japanese had dug in deep, creating fortifications hidden in the dense foliage. The Australian soldiers had to move in close, often having to fight in knee-deep water, under the cover of thick trees, and through a near-constant downpour. It was a situation that would test even the best weapons, and many of the standard-issue firearms failed. As the soldiers advanced, they found themselves in situations where other guns would have given out, whether it was a sudden downpour, a mudslide, or a swampy area. The Owen just kept firing. In fact, it was becoming clear that it was more than just another weapon. It was a lifeline. When a soldier was in a firefight, the last thing they needed was a jammed gun or a misfire. They needed something that could handle the chaos, and the Owen was proving it could do just that. But its success didn't just lie in its ability to fire in extreme conditions. The Owen's design also made it easier to handle in close-quarters combat, which was common in the jungles. Its short barrel and lightweight construction allowed soldiers to maneuver quickly, even in dense undergrowth. This was critical in a place where the enemy could be hiding just a few yards away, and the sound of the gunfire could bring them out of their cover. The Owen allowed the Australians to move fast, respond quickly, and keep fighting. But the Owen's true strength wasn't just in its performance on the battlefield, it was in its resilience. Over time, as more and more soldiers used it, they began to realize that the Owen wasn't just another tool in the arsenal. It was something that could be counted on. The other weapons might fail, but the Owen was there. Whether it was submerged in water or caked in mud, it would fire. The Owen became the weapon that soldiers didn't have to worry about. While the Thompson and Sten were prone to breaking down in the swamps and jungles, the Owen was a constant. In the Pacific War, that reliability was worth its weight in gold. As the Australians fought their way through island after island, the Owen gun became a symbol of Australian ingenuity. A weapon that survived where others failed. And in a war where every advantage mattered, that survival made all the difference. By the time the battle moved from the dense jungles to the harsh island beaches, the Owen was proving itself time and again. From the murky swamps to the craggy rocks, it was there, and it was working. And while other weapons were left behind, the Owen gun kept on going unfazed by the challenges of the Pacific theatre. The Owen gun's rise to fame wasn't an accident. It didn't come from years of high-profile military development or grand plans for a revolutionary weapon. Instead, it was born out of necessity and driven by a singular goal. In the early years of World War II, Australia found itself in a precarious position. It wasn't just fighting the Japanese, it was also fighting the environment itself. By 1941, the Australian Army realised that many of its existing weapons weren't up to the task of jungle combat. The classic Thompson submachine gun, for example, was reliable but had a significant flaw. The Sten, despite its simplicity, was vulnerable to sand and water, and its cheap construction made it unreliable in extreme conditions. Even the Mauser rifles used by the Germans were no match for the suffocating humidity and constant rain that plagued the islands. As a result, the Australian military needed something different, something that could withstand the unique challenges of the Pacific. Owen was working at the Australian Small Arms Factory, a government-run facility that was already developing weapons for the military. Owen's task was simple: design a new submachine gun that could endure the tropical heat and moisture of the islands, and most importantly, keep firing when others wouldn't. He didn't have a big budget, nor did he have years of development behind him. Instead, he had to be resourceful. He started with the basic principles of weapon design, but focused on making it simpler and more durable than anything else. Owen took a long, hard look at the problems that had plagued previous designs, and he understood that the key wasn't just in making a powerful weapon. It was about creating something that could survive the environment, no matter how harsh it got. One of the first innovations he implemented was an enclosed design that kept dirt, mud, and water from entering the mechanism. Unlike the open-chamber designs of the Thompson or the Sten, which were vulnerable to debris, the Owen kept its internals sealed away from the elements. This simple but effective change meant that the Owen could function in conditions that would cripple other guns. But Owen didn't stop there. He focused on making the weapon as easy to maintain as possible. With a design that was simpler and fewer moving parts than the Thompson or Sten, the Owen was less prone to failure. It could be easily disassembled for quick cleaning, even in the field. Owen's design was far from perfect. In fact, the first prototypes of the Owen gun were clunky and rough around the edges. The first few models were far from what we would recognize as the iconic weapon that would later serve in the Pacific. They were experimental, with design flaws that would have to be ironed out through testing and refinement. But the core idea was already there. A weapon that was tough, simple, and built to survive. That was all Owen needed to get started. Once the prototype was ready, the military needed to test it. But this wasn't just about firing off a few rounds at a shooting range. The real test would come in the harsh jungles of New Guinea, where conditions were as extreme as they could get. The Australian Army had already learned the hard way that conventional weapons simply weren't up to the task. If Owen's design could work in this environment, it could work anywhere. Soldiers took the new gun out into the jungle, where the air was thick with humidity and the ground was covered in thick mud and swampy water. For a weapon designed with little more than a few basic principles, the Owen performed remarkably well. It fired reliably, without jamming, even after being submerged in water or caked in mud. Where the Thompson would fail, the Owen kept going. At first, the military brass was skeptical. After all, the Owen didn't look like much. Its design was simple, even crude in some ways, and compared to the more established submachine guns, it didn't have the same polished, high-tech look. But the more the Owen was put to the test, the more it became clear. This was a weapon that could perform in a way that others simply couldn't. The military began to realize that this humble little gun was more than just a stopgap. It was a solution to a real problem. The Owen gun's breakthrough came when it passed its first major test during the Battle of Milne Bay in New Guinea. The Australian forces were fighting a fierce campaign against the Japanese, and the conditions were brutal. It was here that the Owen truly proved its worth. In the middle of the battle, soldiers carrying the Owen encountered mud, swampy water, and torrential rain, but instead of failing, their weapons continued to fire. In fact, many soldiers who had initially doubted the Owen were now impressed with its reliability. Some even said that it was the only weapon they trusted during the campaign. By the end of the battle, the Owen gun had proven itself as a reliable and vital tool in the Australian forces' arsenal. It was rugged, dependable, and above all, it could handle the conditions of the Pacific theatre. It could be thrown in the back of a truck, dropped in the mud, or submerged in water, and still keep firing. As more soldiers began to use the Owen, its reputation grew. The gun became a symbol of resilience, a weapon that could stand up to the harshest conditions and keep fighting. The Owen's simple design was its strength. It wasn't about flashy features or powerful ammunition, it was about surviving when everything else failed. But the real turning point came when the Australian Army decided to make the Owen the standard-issue submachine gun for its troops. This was a bold move. Given that the Owen was still a relatively new weapon, and other, more established guns like the Thompson were already in widespread use. But the military had seen enough. They had witnessed firsthand how the Owen could perform in combat, and they knew that they needed something that could stand up to the brutal conditions of the Pacific. The decision to adopt the Owen wasn't just about practicality, it was about adapting to the unique challenges of the Pacific War. The Australians were fighting a war unlike any other, and they needed weapons that could meet the demands of that environment. And in the Owen gun, they had found exactly what they were looking for. By the time the Allies began their push across the Pacific, the Owen was an essential part of the Australian forces' toolkit. From the jungles of New Guinea to the beaches of Tarakan and beyond, the Owen proved itself time and again, cementing its place as one of the most iconic and reliable weapons of the war. When the Owen gun was first introduced into combat, it was met with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. The Australian soldiers who were issued the weapon had seen their share of failures, from jammed Thompsons to misfiring Stens. They were used to treating weapons like high-maintenance tools, things to be cleaned constantly, pampered in the field, and monitored for malfunctions. But when the Owen hit the front lines, the soldiers quickly learned something remarkable. This was a weapon that didn't need to be babied. It could be dropped, soaked, and caked in mud without losing its ability to fire. The first test of the Owen guns, true combat worth, came during the brutal Battle of Milne Bay in New Guinea in 1942. Australian forces, alongside Allied troops, were locked in a desperate fight to hold back the Japanese invasion. The battlefield was a nightmare. Rainstorms, mud, dense jungle, and the constant threat of ambush. The troops were bogged down by the terrain as much as the enemy, and the conditions were taking their toll on their weapons. Soldiers found themselves battling the environment almost as much as the Japanese. It was here, in the swampy, rain-drenched jungles of New Guinea, that the Owen gun was put to its ultimate test. The troops had to wade through flooded terrain, climb over thick, slippery roots, and maneuver through dense underbrush. Unlike the more complex Thompsons submachine gun, which required careful handling and constant cleaning to maintain reliability, the Owen continued to fire under the harshest conditions. Soldiers reported that even when the weapon was submerged in water or covered in mud, it kept going without fail. The more seasoned troops, initially skeptical of the Owen's simple design, were now seeing its true value. One soldier, caught in the middle of a firefight, recalled how his Owen never faltered, even after it had been dropped into a puddle of swamp water. "I just picked it up, wiped it down a bit, and it was ready to go again," he said. No fuss, no jams, just worked. For the soldiers in the heat of combat, this was a revelation. At a time when every other weapon they used had its limits, the Owen was a lifeline. The battle was grueling, with both sides locked in fierce combat for days on end. The environment played as much of a role as the enemy did. The jungle's thick foliage made it difficult to see the enemy, even when they were close. And the rain-soaked ground made it impossible to get a stable firing position. And yet, in the midst of all this chaos, the Owen continued to perform. As the battle wore on, the Australians began to notice something that would ultimately define the Owen gun's legacy: the weapon's ability to perform when other submachine guns failed. Soldiers carrying Thompsons or Stens found themselves dealing with misfires, jams, or weapons that had simply stopped working. The Owen, on the other hand, seemed impervious to the environment. Even after taking a beating, being dropped in water, coated in mud, or exposed to rain for hours, it kept firing. This wasn't just about a minor advantage, it was a critical one. In battle, especially in the dense jungles of the Pacific, the difference between a working weapon and a malfunctioning one could mean life or death. The Owen gun gave Australian soldiers a crucial edge that they hadn't had before. Where other guns would fail, the Owen succeeded. By the time the battle was over, the Australians had successfully repelled the Japanese, marking the first major Allied victory in the Pacific. The Owen gun had proven its worth, and its reputation spread like wildfire among the troops. The soldiers who had initially been uncertain about the Owen now swore by it. They had seen firsthand how it outperformed its counterparts, and they had come to rely on it in a way they hadn't with any other weapon. But it wasn't just in the dense jungles of New Guinea where the Owen made its mark. As the Allies pushed forward, the Owen continued to prove itself in different environments, from the muddy beaches of the Solomon Islands to the harsh, rocky terrain of Borneo. No matter where it was deployed, the Owen's performance remained consistent. In the brutal conditions of the Pacific theatre, where weapons were constantly exposed to rain, mud, and extreme humidity, the Owen stood out as the one weapon that could take the punishment and still keep firing. One of the keys to the Owen's success was its simple design. Unlike more complex firearms, which were prone to failure when exposed to the elements, the Owen was straightforward and efficient. It didn't require the high-maintenance cleaning or intricate assembly that other weapons demanded. This was especially important in the field, where soldiers had neither the time nor the resources to maintain their weapons with the same level of care they might in a training environment. The Owen's simplicity meant that it could be quickly cleaned with little effort, even under the most trying circumstances. The Owen's reliability under fire soon earned it a reputation among soldiers, who began to swear by the weapon. It became known as the mud-proof gun, a fitting moniker for a weapon that had proven itself time and again in some of the harshest conditions in the world. Soldiers started to understand that the Owen wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was a crucial part of their survival. While it excelled in jungle combat, it wasn't as effective in open, more conventional warfare. Its range was limited, and its accuracy in long-range firefights left much to be desired. But the Owen wasn't designed for precision shooting. It was designed for the close, chaotic combat of the Pacific Theater, where quick, reliable firepower was needed. In this role, it excelled, and its limitations in other areas were a small price to pay for its resilience in the field. By the time the Pacific War came to an end, the Owen gun had cemented its place as one of the most effective weapons in the Australian arsenal. It had survived the harshest conditions imaginable, proving itself time and again as a reliable, no-nonsense weapon that could be counted on when everything else failed. For the soldiers who carried it, the Owen became more than just a gun. It was a trusted companion, a lifeline in a war that seemed to demand the impossible. The Owen gun's legacy didn't just lie in its battlefield performance. It also represented something greater: the ingenuity and determination of the Australian soldiers and engineers who refused to accept failure. It was a symbol of adaptability and resilience, two qualities that would define the Australian military throughout the war. And though it may not have been the most glamorous weapon, the Owen proved time and again that sometimes the simplest designs are the most effective. The Allies began their full-scale assault across the Pacific. The Owen gun had earned its place as a cornerstone of the Australian military. What had started as a simple design to solve a specific problem had transformed into a symbol of ingenuity and resilience. The soldiers who carried it through the jungles of New Guinea, the swamps of the Solomon Islands, and the rocky beaches of Borneo had come to rely on it in a way that no other weapon could match. As the Pacific campaign pressed on, the Owen's reputation spread not just through Australian forces, but also among the Allied troops fighting alongside them. It wasn't long before the Owen became the go-to weapon for close-quarters combat in the harshest environments. Its reliability in the thick jungles, where other weapons had failed, gave it an almost legendary status. Soldiers who had once scoffed at its simple design now swore by it. The Owen was no longer just another weapon. It was the weapon that could get the job done when it mattered most. As the war raged on, the Owen gun began to be used in more specialized operations. Australian commandos, who were tasked with some of the most dangerous and delicate missions in the Pacific, found the Owen to be the perfect tool for their needs. These soldiers were often called upon to perform sabotage operations, ambushes, and stealthy raids behind enemy lines, where every second counted and where noise could mean the difference between life and death. The Owen's compact design, combined with its ability to fire reliably in any conditions, made it the ideal weapon for these types of operations. It wasn't just the jungle that the Owen excelled in. As the Allies turned their attention to the fortified islands of Japan's Pacific Empire, the Owen's effectiveness was tested in a wider range of environments. The Okinawa campaign in 1945 was one such moment that showcased the Owen's versatility. The island was heavily fortified, with the Japanese entrenched in strong positions and prepared for a prolonged defense. The rugged terrain, littered with caves and bunkers, made traditional warfare difficult. But the Owen's small profile and powerful fire rate made it the perfect weapon for clearing out these strongholds. In the brutal, close-quarter fighting that defined the Okinawa campaign, soldiers in the thick of the fighting would often find themselves pressed into narrow spaces where the rapid rate of fire and ease of handling the Owen offered a significant advantage. Whether it was clearing out caves, taking out snipers in tree stands, or engaging in deadly house-to-house combat, the Owen was there, consistently performing where other weapons faltered. Despite its successes, the Owen gun was not without its drawbacks. While it was perfect for close-range combat, it lacked the precision of long-range rifles, and its magazine capacity was smaller than that of the Thompson or Stens. In open-field engagements, it could not match the firepower of a larger, more powerful weapon. but its intended purpose was never to be an all-purpose firearm. It was designed to thrive in the chaotic, often deadly conditions of the Pacific theater, where firepower, speed, and reliability were paramount. In this role, the Owen was unmatched. However, by 1945, as the war in the Pacific began to wind down, questions arose about the future of the Owen gun. Its simplicity, reliability, and success in the Pacific had earned it a place in Australian military history. But could it maintain its relevance in a post-war world? The success of the Owen had led some military officials to look beyond its design, questioning whether newer, more modern weapons might be better suited for the changing needs of post-war combat. The Owen's rise to prominence in the Pacific had been driven by necessity and ingenuity, and now, in the final stages of the war, there was a growing sense that its time was coming to an end. As the war moved from the jungles and swamps of the Pacific to the vast expanses of Europe, the types of combat would change. The era of jungle warfare was drawing to a close, and with it, the Owen's primary advantage. The ability to perform in extreme conditions was no longer as critical. Despite this, the Owen gun had made its mark. Its success in the Pacific, particularly in close-quarters engagements, had cemented its place as one of the most effective and reliable submachine guns of the war. But the Owen's true legacy wasn't just in its battlefield success. It represented something far greater: the resourcefulness and adaptability of a nation that had been thrown into one of the most brutal conflicts in history. Australia, with its relatively small military presence, had found a way to punch above its weight with a weapon that was as simple as it was effective. As the war in the Pacific reached its end, the Owen gun's role began to fade into the background. With the rise of more modern, versatile firearms and the changing nature of warfare, the Owen's usefulness in future conflicts was uncertain. It was replaced by more advanced weaponry, and the production lines that had churned out thousands of Owens during the war were eventually shut down. Yet, the Owen gun's legacy lived on. In the years following the war, it remained a symbol of Australia's contribution to the Allied effort. While it may have been overshadowed by the larger, more famous weapons of the war, the Owen stood as a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness that had allowed a small nation to make a big impact. It may not have been the most glamorous weapon of the war, but it was one of the most effective, and in the harsh, unforgiving environment of the Pacific, that made all the difference. In the end, the Owen gun was a reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. In a world dominated by complex, high-tech weapons, the Owen showed that reliability, simplicity, and adaptability could often be more valuable than firepower and precision. The Australian soldiers who relied on the Owen understood this better than anyone. They had seen the worst of the Pacific theatre, and in the Owen, they had found a weapon that would not fail them when it counted. By the time the Allies had advanced across the Pacific toward Japan, the Owen gun had established itself as more than just a tool for survival. It was a weapon that could change the course of the war. The simple, rugged submachine gun, which had once been looked at with skepticism by many in the military, had earned its place as the unsung hero of the Pacific campaign. In battles like the bloody confrontations on Guadalcanal, Milne Bay, and the Solomon Islands, the Owen gun had shown its true power. But it wasn't until the brutal fight for Okinawa that the weapon would truly demonstrate its full impact. Okinawa, located just 350 miles from Japan, would prove to be the final hurdle before the Allies could launch an invasion of the Japanese mainland. The battle for the island began in April 1945, and it quickly became one of the most intense and deadly campaigns in the Pacific War. The Japanese defenders had dug in, using the island's rugged terrain to their advantage. They built elaborate defensive positions, including cave networks and underground bunkers. The terrain, a mixture of steep hills, rocky outcroppings, and dense vegetation, was as much of an enemy as the Japanese soldiers themselves. For the Allied forces, the fight for Okinawa was a test of endurance, resilience, and firepower. They had to fight for every inch of ground, facing both the Japanese defenders and the island's difficult terrain. The Japanese military had set up strong defensive positions, with soldiers hiding in caves, behind boulders, and in the thick underbrush, making it difficult for the Allies to gain a clear line of sight. Standard rifles and machine guns were often ineffective in this type of combat. The Japanese soldiers used the environment to their advantage, firing from concealed positions and retreating into the natural cover whenever they were under threat. This was where the Owen gun's unique strengths truly came to the forefront. Unlike the heavier, less maneuverable weapons used by the Allies, the Owen's compact size and rapid fire rate allowed soldiers to engage the enemy in the tight, close-quarters combat that defined the battle for Okinawa. The rugged design, which had been perfected over the course of the war, meant that the Owen could be relied upon to function even in the harshest conditions. It was a perfect fit for the challenges presented by the island's terrain. The Battle of Okinawa was a brutal, drawn-out affair, with intense fighting in the hills and caves where Japanese soldiers hid. The Allies were often forced into situations where they had to fight from close range, using short bursts of fire to clear out enemy positions. The Owen gun excelled in these conditions, providing soldiers with the firepower they needed to dislodge entrenched Japanese troops from caves and other defensive positions. Its lightweight design made it ideal for moving quickly through dense vegetation and difficult terrain, while its reliability in the harsh conditions of the island ensured that it could keep firing when other weapons failed. In one particularly brutal engagement, a group of Australian commandos, armed with the Owen, advanced through a section of Okinawa's dense jungle, where Japanese snipers were laying down deadly fire. The soldiers, using the Owen's rapid-fire capabilities, were able to suppress the sniper positions long enough to close the gap and clear them out. This type of combat, where speed, firepower, and adaptability were critical, was where the Owen truly excelled. But the Owen's performance during the Okinawa campaign wasn't just about battlefield success. It was about the impact it had on the morale of the soldiers who carried it. In a war that had already claimed so many lives, the Owen became more than just a weapon. It became a symbol of reliability, of something that could be counted on when everything else seemed to be falling apart. For soldiers who had fought through the harshest conditions of the Pacific, the Owen gun was a constant, an unwavering ally that allowed them to survive where others might have failed. The Owen's success in Okinawa didn't just make it the weapon of choice for the Australian Army. It solidified its place in the broader Allied effort. The weapon was now widely recognized as an essential tool for infantry fighting, particularly in the brutal close-quarters warfare that had become characteristic of the Pacific campaign. It was a symbol of adaptability, of Australian ingenuity, and of the resilience of the soldiers who carried it. But with the end of the Pacific War on the horizon, the Owen gun's time in the spotlight was nearing its end. As the Allied forces advanced toward Japan and the war wound down, there was a growing realization that the type of warfare that had made the Owen so effective, jungles, caves, and dense urban fighting, was becoming less relevant. The future of warfare was changing, and with it, the demands placed on weapons. The Owen, though highly effective in the Pacific, was not suited for the large-scale battles that would dominate the post-war world. As the Allied forces celebrated their victory in the Pacific and the Japanese surrendered in August 1945, the question arose of what would happen to the Owen gun. While it had been an invaluable tool during the war, it was clear that it would soon be replaced by more modern, versatile firearms. It had proven itself in the most demanding environments imaginable, and its success would forever be tied to the triumph of the Allied forces in the Pacific. In the years that followed, the Owen gun would fade from the spotlight. The evolution of military technology and tactics made weapons like the Owen obsolete, and it was ultimately replaced by more sophisticated firearms. But the Owen's impact on the Pacific War was undeniable. It had been the weapon that survived where others failed, the tool that allowed soldiers to fight and win in the most challenging environments. And in the hearts of the Australian soldiers who had carried it, the Owen gun would always be remembered as the weapon that helped them win. As the Pacific conflict drew to a close and the world turned its focus to rebuilding, the Owen gun remained a symbol of the grit and determination of those who had fought through the mud, the rain, and the fire. It wasn't the most glamorous weapon of the war, but it was the one that had been there when it mattered the most. As the Pacific War drew to a close in 1945, the Owen Gun's role in the Allied victory was solidified, and its legacy began to take shape. It had proven itself as a vital tool in the harsh conditions of jungle warfare, saving lives, providing firepower when it was needed most, and allowing soldiers to push through the unforgiving landscapes of the Pacific Islands. But as the world shifted from the brutality of wartime to the uncertain peace that followed, the Owen Gun's future seemed uncertain. Its impact, however, would resonate far beyond the confines of the Pacific. When the guns fell silent in the wake of Japan's surrender, the need for the Owen Gun began to wane. The post-war world saw the rise of more advanced weaponry and a shift in military tactics that no longer demanded the close-quarter, jungle-heavy warfare in which the Owen had excelled. Its small, lightweight design, which had made it perfect for the dense jungles of New Guinea and the caves of Okinawa, was no longer suited to the new demands of the modern battlefield. The Owen was gradually phased out, and the military began to look toward more versatile firearms for the future. Despite its relegation to history, the Owen Gun's legacy remained strong, particularly within the Australian military. While it would never be adopted on a global scale or enter the annals of history as one of the most famous weapons of the war, it became a symbol of Australia's contribution to the Allied war effort, a testament to Australian ingenuity and perseverance. And for the soldiers who had carried it through the most difficult battles, the Owen was more than just a weapon. It was a companion. The Owen Gun's enduring legacy lay not only in its battlefield performance, but in the story it told about necessity, innovation, and resilience. It was born from a need, designed in a time of crisis, and refined by the demands of warfare. Its simplicity was its greatest strength. It was a reminder that sometimes the most effective solutions are the simplest ones. Where other weapons failed under the harsh conditions of the Pacific, the Owen Gun held firm. It was the weapon that never let them down, the tool that could withstand the elements when everything else failed. It wasn't just a piece of machinery. It was a symbol of survival, a lifeline in a battle that seemed never-ending. And for the Australian soldiers who relied on it, it represented something more personal: trust. In a war where trust was often in short supply, the Owen was something they could rely on, something that wouldn't let them down when their lives were on the line. The Owen Gun continued to be used in limited capacity by the Australian military. It saw some use during the Korean War in the early 1952, but its days as a frontline weapon were numbered. As the Cold War era ushered in new technologies and more advanced firearms, the Owen was slowly replaced by weapons like the F-1 submachine gun, which better suited the needs of modern warfare. By the 1962, the Owen Gun was officially retired from active service, and it faded from the military's arsenal. Yet, even after its retirement, the Owen Gun remained an iconic piece of Australian military history. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of the country's contribution to the war effort and its resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. In the years following the war, veterans of the Pacific campaigns would often recount stories of their time with the Owen, of how it had served them faithfully through the toughest battles. For many, the Owen represented the heart of the Australian soldier. Tough, reliable, and unyielding. The Owen's impact was also felt in the design of future weapons. The principles that had guided its creation, simplicity, reliability, and durability, were integrated into the design of subsequent firearms. The need for weapons that could function in extreme environments, that could endure the harshest conditions, became a cornerstone of military firearm development. In this sense, the Owen Gun left an indelible mark on weapon design that went far beyond its time of service. In the decades following its retirement, the Owen Gun became something of a collector's item, admired by military historians and enthusiasts alike. Its simple design and historical significance made it a prized piece in the world of military memorabilia. While it was no longer in active service, it had become a symbol of Australia's contribution to the war, a reminder of the soldiers who had relied on it and the battles it had helped them win. The Owen's place in Australian history was secure. It had been the weapon that had helped turn the tide in the Pacific, the tool that allowed Australian soldiers to fight and win when the odds were against them. And while it was eventually replaced by more modern designs, the Owen gun would never be forgotten. Its legacy would live on in the stories of those who had carried it through the jungles of New Guinea, the caves of Okinawa, and the muddy beaches of the Solomon Islands. It was a weapon that had stood the test of time and endured when others failed. And for that, it would always be remembered as one of the unsung heroes of World War II. For the men who fought alongside it, the Owen gun was more than just a weapon. It was a companion in battle, a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. It was the weapon that could be counted on when everything else was falling apart. And in the end, that reliability became its greatest legacy, ensuring that the Owen gun would forever be remembered as one of the most important tools of the Pacific War.